Okay, hi everyone. Welcome back to POT 4936, Democracy and Propaganda. This video is the asynchronous class assignment for Wednesday, which is today, the day before Thanksgiving. You don't need to watch this today, of course, just anytime over the holiday weekend. Sometime before Monday would probably be good. Because Monday, remember, we're going to have one more in-class assignment that's worth like 5 or 6 points. And then Wednesday is our second in-class essay. So I posted that announcement a couple of days ago. I didn't hear back from many people, but I heard back from a few that, of course, no surprise here, y'all were in favor of dropping the last reading and just ending the class on this text, which I am reluctantly okay with. I like the last reading because it's like a concrete application of these ideas to actually how ideas about truth, all these ideas we've been reading that are very abstract, ideas about why truth is important to democracy and everything. Well, the Taiwo text is actually, a concrete application of those ideas. Here is exactly how truth can make our country more democratic. So I love that text for that, but due to the hurricanes, losing so much time for that has just pushed it off of the syllabus. And I think we should end the book with, end the semester with Sophia Rosenfeld's book. So that means the second in-class essay, which is going to happen next Wednesday on our last class period, it will just be about Rosenfeld. Although I may ask you to relate Rosenfeld to another article, something that we previously read in the class. Anyway, so what I want to do in this video is just kind of go over, again, like some overall points in the Rosenfeld book, draw your attention to a couple of specific things, and talk a little bit more about, I think I have one point to make about the populism thing, and that's that, populism is not just a phenomena of the far right. It can happen on both sides of the political spectrum. And then I want to also draw your attention to some stuff that she says in chapter 4, and I'll talk a little bit more about postmodernism. So just to recap where we're at today, remember I said that if you have time to reread anything, and of course, you guys, I know you're sick of hearing me say this, but you should always read things twice. You should read the first chapter twice after you finish reading the whole book. And for those of you who just have the ebook version, I know it's only a couple of people, but Brianna and somebody else, was it Gabby or maybe it was Nada? Anyway, y'all were sharing some ebook version. That's fine. But don't worry. That's okay that you can't print out the whole thing. You don't need to. And actually, it's even better if you don't. Just as you're reading, notice certain things, like how you see how I have in my book little colored tabs. That's because that's where she has a good definition of populism, for example, or a good definition of something else, just key things that you're going to want to be able to cite as you read. So you can just do that with your ebook version as well. Just cite the specific, write down specific things from specific pages and put down the page number. So I think it's fine that you don't have the hard copy. I think it's totally okay. It can work, and it can even work better. If you do have the hard copy, just a reminder, do what I do, mark it up, write in the margins, put little sticky notes, like this one says, how does public knowledge or serviceable truth get produced? And I have that sticky note on one of the pages, So do like that. That way you can find things quickly in the text, because you don't know what the essay question is going to be exactly. You just know that you're going to need to be really familiar with this book so that you can find things in the text. Because if all you do is provide a very superficial overall summary of the Rosenfeld book, that's not going to get you very far on the in-class essay. I've come across a couple essays so far in the first in-class essay that do that. They have very superficial summaries of the texts, but that's only worth about 1/3 of the grade. So that's not enough to, get you to a good full answer to the essay prompt. So I want you to be able to be very familiar with the text so that you can find things as you engage your brain, and think about the whatever the essay prompt is. Think about what your answer is going to be outline it on your outline first, and then be able to quickly find stuff in the text to back that answer up. Okay, so I know y'all are sick of hearing me say this, but it just bears repeating. Always, being able to back your answers up with citations and specific references to the text is crucial to be able to write a good in-class essay. Okay, so just to recap where Sophia Rosenfeld began, she's talking about, remember we talked about how she's a historian of ideas. So her whole book is a history of how people have thought about truth over time and how that idea has changed over time. And what she's saying is that we needed to come to a specific way of thinking about truth in order for modern democracy to be born. As she says, modern democracies have a distinctive relationship to the truth. So our ideas about truth during the Middle Ages, for example, were not such that a modern democracy could be born. Because if you think about it, Middle Ages, say before the Protestant Revolution, the Catholic Church is the religious authority. They're the epistemic authority. We've heard that term a few times. There's no questioning of the truth. There's no idea or concept that regular people can have access to the truth. So really the only political system that makes sense is a monarchy, right? If you think that only kings and clergy can have access to the truth, then, well, that's one political system, monarchy. In order for modern democracies to be born, you have to begin to take steps towards this idea that regular people can have access to the truth as well. And so we begin to see those steps happen around the 18th century. So basically the Enlightenment, maybe a little bit before that too, like also the Protestant Revolution. Both of those two things play a role in changing how humans thought about truth, or they were emblematic, not that they caused that, but that these events were emblematic of how humans in Europe at that time were changing how they thought about truth, as being possessed only by a few people to being potentially possessed by anyone. So if you think about this period, this shift really starts to happen around, say, as early as like the 1700s. John Locke, Francis Bacon. There's this shift from ancient thought about truth to a new way of thinking about truth. John Locke says, we can't answer any of those questions about whether God can exist or what the nature of God is or anything like that. All we can know is what's based on the world around us now, and the best way to discover truths about the world around us is through empiricism, which I think I've said before. Empiricism is just the belief that knowledge can be gained kind of through our senses, through testing things in the world around us. This is as opposed to purely logical, rational truths, like that stuff takes place in our heads, right? So empiricism is like about the idea of like, it's the scientific method. We're going to test this material and see what its chemical components are, or we're going to, perform physics experiments, right? So of course this leads to many great, wonderful advancements in the areas of the natural sciences. People, we discover gravity. We have better ideas about how the Earth goes around the sun and not the other way around. And there's all these wonderful advancements in the natural sciences. So humans were discovering better ideas about how the natural world works, right? And that comes along with a really crucial idea about the revisability of truth. That truth is not quite set in stone forever and ever, right? As we gain more information, we may revise what we think is true. We could always be wrong, right? So if you think about it, there's quite a contrast to that from what is implied by the ancient concept of truth, what we learned in Plato. Remember how Socrates is thinking about how we get access to truth through introspection, through rational, logical means, right, we can arrive at an idea of truth which is eternal. Remember, this wasn't in Plato's Gorgias, but it is in the Republic and other places in Plato, where he talks about the essential forms of things, like the nature of things. Ancient Greeks were always interested in understanding what the nature of this or that thing is. What is its essential form? Right? Well, implied in that is this idea that once you discover that, it's not expected to change. Like the nature of justice is the nature of justice. It's not going to change over time. In fact, that's very much what Socrates and Plato were arguing against, that the sophists argued for, that, yeah, ideas about morality and justice are dependent upon what city you live in. Each city decides for itself what is just, stuff like that. So you see how implied in the Socratic method or in Plato is this idea that truth is eternal and unchanging once you discover it, that it's universal, eternal, and unchanging, right? So you see how that's different from the 1700s, maybe a little bit into the 16, mostly 1700s, the 18th century, where like people were beginning to have this idea that no, maybe truth is not necessarily unchanging. In fact, our science experiments tell us that sometimes we were wrong about stuff. And so we have this idea of the revisability and the fallibility of truth sometimes. And so that becomes very important to creating this new epistemic foundation for that modern democracies get born out of, right? So that, remember, she talks about the two sources. I think I have them listed here. That was those two ideas about truth fundamental to the founding of the US and other modern democracies. The epistemological division of labor, on the one hand, the wisdom of the crowd, and on the other hand, the specialized knowledge of experts. So without both of those things, regular people participating in the creation of serviceable truths that a state needs in order to operate, and the knowledge of experts, then democracy breaks down. We really do, modern democracies, in order for them to exist, we really do need both of those things. Okay, so next up, I'm going to talk about a little bit more about chapter 3, where she talks about populism, what it is, why it's anti-democratic, and most importantly, how it can arise from both the right and the left. Neither side of the political spectrum has a monopoly on populism. So it's something that can happen from either the right or the left. I'll talk about that in the next slide. And then finally, in chapter 4, I'll talk a bit more about what she talks about, the various causes of the current political situation and what we can do to ensure that modern democracies survive. Okay, so chapter 3 was all about the populist backlash, and the question in Monday's ICA was about, where are the Enlightenment roots in populism as well. I haven't graded those yet, actually, so I have no idea. This is why it was hard for me to decide whether we should stick with Rosenfeld, because I haven't yet graded any of your ICAs on Rosenfeld, so I have no idea how y'all are doing. If you're struggling or if you're getting it and it's easy, I have no idea until I grade your papers, and I haven't had a chance to do that because I'm finishing grading the first in-class essay. Anyway, but hopefully thinking about that ICA, that question in the ICA was helpful to get you thinking about the various aspects of populism that she talks about in chapter 3. I wanted to point out also that it's important to note that populism can come from both sides of the political spectrum. So see pages 105 to 112 for her discussion of this. And no matter which side it comes from, populist epistemology, the belief that only the people have true knowledge, the elites are the enemy of the people, that kind of thing refuels both a rejection of monarchy and a rejection of modern democracy, both. So it just leaves you with like a populist authoritarianism, because there has to be some person, some charismatic figure, the populist demagogue, who becomes the embodiment of all of the people's desire. And it's assumed that the people all want the same thing too, that they all have the same interests, they all want exactly the same thing, that they're very clear about what they want. This is never the case. This is a fantasy, right? But in the populist fantasy, this is how the world works, that there are the people who all want the same thing, and their desires and wishes are going to be embodied in the form of a charismatic leader, who is going to wave the magic wand and make all the solve all the world's problems. But anyway, but it is important to remember that even though we're seeing right now, of course, she does talk a lot about Trump. It's important to remember that even though right now what we're seeing a lot of is populism on the right side of the political spectrum, populism certainly does exist on the left as well. And if you look at the history, the scholarship, if any of you ever do a paper on populism, it's a great thing to do a paper on. There's been so much scholarship. There have been people who studied populism in Europe versus populism in Latin America. And there was this big question about why are they different? For a while, they seemed different. And part of it was just that, populism often grows out of a backlash against whoever is in power. So they were different because they said they were different because populism in Europe tended to be of the right-wing variety, while populism in Latin America tended to be of the left. And that turns out to be, it seems, mostly because in Europe, most of the existing governments were left or center left, or otherwise moderate. And so the backlash against them is the right, versus in Latin America, up until maybe recently, sort of. I mean, I know it's a big generalization. Not all the countries fit in this, but there were a lot of right wing. The governments in power were on the right, and so the populist backlash took the form of the left. So it's just taking the form of the opposite of whatever is in power. So I think that basic idea has a lot of explanatory power when it comes to understanding why we see different kinds of populism emerge in different areas, just because it's always a backlash against whoever is seen in power. So I think in the US, we're seeing a populist backlash on the right because basically of the Obama era. We had the Obama era, which was, very progressive. It was a left of center administration. And so the backlash is going to be on the right. And so that's why our populism right now is right-wing populism. But in previous eras, you could say like maybe in the 60s, sort of, that sort of breaks down. But anyway, you can see how in other areas, if the status quo power is conservative and on the right wing, then the populist backlash is likely to come from the left. So it's all just a matter of, reacting. It's the opposite of whoever is in power. Okay, so chapter 3 is pretty straightforward. I encourage you to, hopefully you've read it by now, and you're moving on to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is where she explores, I think it's called Democracy in an Age of Lies. How can we go forward, given, how does all of this history that she's told us about help us understand our current situation and how we can go forward? And so it also is where she explores potential causes of this particular cultural moment and asks, should we blame postmodernism? Is it because of social media? Is it the weaponization of free speech? That was a really interesting conversation. So I'd like you to notice that. Or is it like just economic realities, the effects of capitalism, the effects of neoliberal economic policies, for example, increasing gaps between the very wealthy and everyone else. All of those have been explored as possible causes for why we're seeing this particular populist backlash that we are. So on the next slide, I want to explore a little bit more in detail about that question about postmodernism, because I think it's where a lot of people get hung up and there's a lot of misunderstanding around it. I may have mentioned this in other videos, but I will talk about it again in this one because it's useful and she talks about it as well. Okay, so should we blame postmodernism? The other causes that she talked about, I think, are relatively straightforward. Students are really familiar with social media, the potential downsides of it, how it operates on, eliciting extreme behaviors or extreme emotional reactions in order to keep you watching so that they can sell more ads. So the whole business model of social media is one that perpetuates political polarization. So that's one of the causes she talks about. What were the other causes? The weaponization of free speech. I want you to look that one up on your own because it's really interesting. Think about how, there's a contradiction there that may reflect some of stuff that we read previously maybe in Stanley a bit, and maybe even a bit in Plato, that the internal contradiction. But in this slide, what I want to talk about is that concept of postmodernism. What is it? Basically, when people talk about postmodernism, they're just referring to a late 20th century idea of social constructs. That's one of the main things that people are usually referring to. The idea that some facts are social facts. So, for example, the social facts are ideas about people and society. So examples are gender norms. Females act like this. Males act like that. We perform our gender, our gender with our actions. There's this great word by Judith Butler, performativity. So gender is something that we perform every day. Every little things, like the fact my hair is like this and it's some other different style. Most of us perform one or the other. Some of us perform both or try to perform neither. But gender, this concept of gender, as opposed to a biological fact, which is sex, the concept of gender is a social idea that we've attached to biological facts such as sex, male, female, right? Other social constructs include the concept of money, the idea that, I can give you some pieces of paper and you're going to give me something else in exchange for those pieces of paper. That's a social construct. The pieces of paper in and of themselves don't mean anything. It's what, we have to give them meaning, and we have to create that social construct in order to have that concept of money. Okay, so social constructs are not necessarily bad things. They're just inevitable things. It's how social constructs, social facts are what create the social world. And if we're in a social science, and guess what? Political science is one of the social sciences. Social sciences just study the world of human beings. If we're studying the world of human beings, then we are studying social facts. And it's not like you can treat a social fact in the same way as other kinds of facts that are not about human social realities, such as the law of gravity, for example. These are very different kinds of facts, right? Now, this is not an idea that Hannah Arendt talks about much in her article at all. I don't know why. It was maybe, some of the key texts had not come out yet, but she is not much of one for talking very much about social constructs. It's really a late 20th century sort of thing. This book by Berger and Luckman, for example, came out in 1960. It's called The Social Construction of Reality. And then there is Derrida, there's Michel Foucault. We've already encountered that name. I forget in what context earlier, but Michel Foucault is another idea, he's a French social theorist who talked about how power works through these social constructs, basically, like that power, where it's not power, you don't always have to like beat someone over the head in order to get them to do what you want, right? There are other ways that power works more subtly. And so that's what Michel Foucault is describing in his many books, Discipline and Punish, Sociology of Knowledge, various, he has multiple books. He's a really great thinker. You will definitely encounter him in grad school. Anyway, all of this stuff, sort of late 20th century things. So all of that kind of gets grouped under that category of postmodernism, which is not a great scientific word. There's other more precise words that people use for various aspects of that people now use instead of postmodernism. But the word postmodernism is kind of used in the popular culture, often by people who don't understand what it is. They just have been told that it's bad. They don't know what it is, but just that it's bad. And so they have a very strong opinion about it, even though they don't know really what it is. But I hope this little explanation, and I think her explanation was fairly good too. She references the Berger and Luckman book, for example. Anyway, so we have this, out of this idea about social constructs, there is a critique of rationalism and objectivity. And it's a very important critique. It's
it was a much needed critique at the time, because at the time we were, especially in the social sciences, we were not very good about recognizing the ways that social facts get constructed and the ways in which they are not universal. And we may think that they are universal, but they're not. So that's what she's talking about when she's saying that there's a critique of rationalism and objectivity in this postmodernism thing. She's talking about that. You know, there were some really great books that I remember reading when I was younger, in my first time in grad school, about science and all of the ways that gender norms crept into concepts of what science is, for example. That's an example of the kinds of critiques that were going on and that are still going on, and that are very important to understanding, like all the ways that what we think of as rationality is not at all objective. It actually does have hidden influences of race, class, and gender. So these critiques are really important because they are able to identify those hidden things, those hidden influences that are influencing something that we think, that we're saying is objective. So those were really important critiques that we should not dismiss. They were super important. But what has happened now is that there's been a perversion of those ideas, a twisting of them for propagandistic purposes, to make it seem like that means therefore there is no objective truth, and the truth is whatever I say it is, right? Like we each get to define our own truth. That's not what postmodernism is. It's a misunderstanding of postmodernism, either intentional or unintentional. But that's where this whole idea comes from. So I think it's great. I think this is in chapter 4. So if this is one of those chapters that I think you should read twice. It's definitely very helpful, and especially that little section on postmodernism, because if you've ever wondered about that term, where it comes from and what it means, and is it really to blame for our current situation, that's a great explanation. So I hope this was helpful. I think I have one more slide, but I forgot what I'm going to tell you on it. Let's see.
Okay, so finally, last slide about how the chapter 4, I said it would be good to have a good idea of precisely what were those various potential causes that she talks about. I think there's like 4 or 5 of them earlier in the chapter, the closing chapter. Those would be good things, good details to have in your in-class essay. But also the overall point of the chapter, I think, is to help us figure out how can knowing all of this history that she's just told us about, how can that help? How do we preserve this unique epistemology that has made modern democracy possible? And she says something somewhere in that chapter, like by returning to this modest conception of truth in political life that started to take form in the late Enlightenment, which is not just about finding ways to cultivate pluralism. It's about finding that balance that is, she says, on page 159, equidistant from technocratic temptation on the one hand and the populist temptation on the other. So, somehow we've got to avoid falling back into this belief that there is one dogmatic truth, there is one authority for truth, and yet also avoid this idea that truth is whatever we want it to be, that there is no such thing as truth. Those are the two things we need to avoid. Look also at what she says. I think this is very hopeful. What is democracy's greatest advantage that she talks about in the last pages, right? That idea of the revisability, that there is no final word on truth. And that's okay. We're never going to find the definitive capital T truth, that exists out there once and for all time. That's all right. But if we can hold on to the idea that through this process described earlier in the book, where we have the idea that regular people can access knowledge, also those regular people being guided by experts, that we can come up with what that term she calls serviceable truths. And now finally, at the very end of the semester, we finally get an idea of what she means by serviceable truths. We've been using that term. It's a jargony term, but I think this is really where she finally it sort of comes together as like, oh, that's why she's calling it a serviceable truth, right? Because it's not like the capital T truth that is true for all time, objective. It's not like that ancient concept that Socrates and Plato thought we could get at, that, this concept of justice. It's not that, but it is the kinds of truths that we can come together around in order to live as a modern democracy, in order to govern ourselves by ourselves without some authoritarian dictatorship or some populist demagogue who is the ultimate decider. These are serviceable truths that we can agree upon in order to exist as a modern democracy, right? So that's the we part, remember, of the Declaration of Independence. That's the we hold these truths that unites us. We are a people who hold these truths upon which we have formed a modern democracy, which, when you think about it, isn't that amazing? Democracy, the idea that we can rule ourselves, almost doesn't work for anything larger than for anything larger than a city-state, like direct democracy like Athens had. Almost democracy doesn't work on a large scale, such as modern nation states, right? Almost. It does work if we have this understanding, this particular understanding of how truth comes into being, that particular understanding of how the epistemological foundation of modern nation states. If we have that, then modern democracy can continue to be a viable political system. If we get rid of that epistemic basis, though, then modern democracy stops being a viable political system, and it becomes just kind of a blip on the trajectory of human history, just a blip that happened during the 20th century and died out within 100 years. I forgot to show y'all the chart of like how the growth of modern democracies, and how when we started the beginning of the 20th century, most countries were not democracies. Most countries were autocracies. And what we see throughout the 20th century, those of you who were in my INR 2002 Intro to International Relations class, you may remember this. I showed this chart. You can see throughout the 20th century that democracies increase. I have a chart of, that's showing the number of democracies going up and up, and the number of autocratic nation states going down, the number of autocracies going down, right? So the world is becoming more and more democratic and less autocratic, until right at the turn of the 21st century, when those two lines start meeting, they start inching closer together, right? And then slowly over the past 20 years, we've seen democracies going down and the number of autocracies going up. That's this democratic backsliding that has been happening over approximately the past 25 years or so. It happens right around, just around the turn of the century. The rise of social media around 2005, 2006, 2007. That was when Facebook and YouTube and all of the social media starts taking off. Coincidentally, that coincides with the beginning of the decline of democracies and the rise in the rejection of science and expertise, a rise in conspiratorial thinking. All of that stuff. So if we want to reverse that trend, then this book is talking about how we need to really recognize what is the epistemic basis of modern democracy and how can we preserve it, right? So I think that this book is actually a good thing to end on. She does talk a little bit about Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in the end of this book. Maybe that's what inspired me to use the Taiwo article. But Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, those are a great concrete application of how these ideas get applied to create a society, any society, to be more democratic than what it was before. The reason why I think maybe it is good to end on this book is because I really think that this book, maybe more so than any other, reminds us that what political science and specifically political theory, remember this class has been a political theory class, all about political philosophy and how we can create the world that we want to live in. It reminds us that that is possible. That is a thing. We do have agency, right? That's what political theory is all about. It's the belief that we humans, we do not have to live in chaos and anarchy where only the strong survive and might makes right. You know, that world that Callicles was talking about in Plato's Gorgias. That is not our destiny. That is not predetermined. Or if it isn't, if we want to take action and avoid that, we can, right? We can create the kind of world that we want to live in. A world where justice and equality do define political life. But we're only going to get there if we decide to take charge of our political destiny. If we believe that we humans do indeed have agency to create a better world for ourselves, then that can become part of our future. If we think that we are predestined to just live in a world where the strong rule over the weak and might makes right and it's just the law of the jungle, then we kind of lock in that destiny for ourselves, right? If that's what happens if we just give up and think, well, you know, politics is always going to triumph over the truth. The truth is whatever the strongest believe. They will dominate the weak, and there's nothing we can do about it. If we just throw up our hands and think that's just how the way it's going to be, then that's making a decision. That's actually exercising our agency as well by rescinding our agency and thinking that's just inevitable. Then we lock in that for our political future. But as long as humanity has a faith in our own agency to create the kind of world that we want to live in, then I think there's hope for humanity. So, okay, I know this has been my longest video lecture yet, but I hope it's been helpful. Monday, I think after the holiday, come into class, we'll do a group ICA. So here's a reward for any of you who've lasted and finished the very last of the video lecture. Monday's ICA will be a group activity. So that will help you a little bit. Also give you a last chance to talk to your friends and neighbors in the class. And then we'll come in on the Wednesday and we'll do the second in-class essay just about the Sophia Rosenfeld book. Okay? So I hope you found this video helpful. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful and safe holiday. And I will see you all back in the classroom next week for our last week of class. Bye-bye.